we're very grateful to Professor Armine Ishkanian and to Dr. Razmik Panossian for being with us tonight. And the occasion is Razmik is in town, and so we have to grab him for any time he comes, really. There's always something interesting to talk about. But it's been 6 years, almost 6 years, since Razmik has taken over as the director of the Armenian communities. Somebody's shaking their head. No, 2013. It's been almost 6 years since he's taken over as director of the Armenian Communities Department at the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation. And as many or most of you will know, he's really turned things upside down and just done an amazing amount of work since he's taken over there. A big variety of things, and genuinely reaching out in his first year, traveling across the world to visit all kinds of small and big and medium-sized communities, to get to know them, to find out what they might be thinking about, what they need, what they say they need. So he got off to a great start, and I believe, in my opinion, he's continued, wonderful fashion. But it'll be very interesting to hear what our Armine has to ask him about, because I think she's going to dig pretty deeply into this. Let me just say that Dr. Armine Ishkanian teaches at the London School of Economics, and she has a much longer title. She's the Associate Professor and the Program Director of the MSc in International Social and Public Policy in the Department of Social Policy at the LSE. And Armine has a long history of work both in Armenia and in the diaspora, and she brings, as any of you who came to our last town hall know, that she has a wonderful combination of a sense of humor and very acute vision here. And we'll be, I think, ready with some good questions. We'll have about 40 minutes of talk between them, conversation, and then we'll go on to questions afterwards. And we'll end at about 8:30 in time for wine and nibbles and more conversation. Thank you again for coming. Just to let you know, we are filming this part of the program, but then we'll stop when the questions begin. Okay.
So I can say the controversial things.
Thanks,
Shushan.
Hello, Armine.
Hello, Razmik.
If I can let out a secret, the last time she interrogated me was for a job interview.
Yeah. And he passed. That's why he's here. So I've interrogated a couple other people in this room. So. Well, I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased that we're going to have this discussion. So I'm not going to interrogate you. I'm just going to have a nice conversation. So let's start with something fairly simple. If you had to describe your tenure as the director of the Armenian Communities Department in just 3 words, what would those be?
Just 3 words. I had prepared a nice list of all. I anticipated you will ask what are your successes, but in 3 words, that means I have to prioritize things. I won't say things regarding the programs because we do so many things. We'll talk about it. The first word that comes to mind is patience. I learned that dealing with Armenian community, institutions, diaspora, there has to be a lot of patience. And my nature was that I want to get things done and patience. The second word that comes to mind, I guess, is balance, because we always have to balance things in a position like this. Politically balance between the different community elements, geographically balanced so that not everything is in one country or another country. Gender balance in terms of scholarships, and so balance is the second word. And the last word I would say, after 6 years, I'm still having fun. So it's a fun.
I'm glad to hear that.
Sometimes, I don't have hair to pull, but sometimes you want to pull your hair, but almost always it's fun.
Good.
It's a fun place to be.
Well, that leads me to my next question. What would you say has been your proudest achievement thus far?
Western Armenian, HW HYW. And you might wonder what ISO code is and why is this significant and what did we have to do with it. When you Google it, when you use Google Translate between English and French, let's say, you write in English and instantly it gives French. Obviously it's not someone who quickly translates and sends it to you. It's comparing millions and millions of pages in corpuses in English and French and then finding the right translation. In order for that to happen, the language needs to be coded, which means English has a code, French has a code. In the Armenian case, there was no code difference between Eastern Armenian and Western Armenian. And that meant that you could not prepare a corpus or do a computer program for Western Armenian and one for Eastern Armenian. It just mixed everything up and asked Western Armenian to actually issue that code. And that, why is this significant? Because it makes spell checker programs possible in Western Armenian. So in a few months' time, you will be able to download on your smartphone or Android phone a spell checker program, so that when you write in Armenian, it will automatically check and correct the spelling just like it does in English and French and all that. So that, that's another element where I'm particularly pleased that we have done some work in terms of the electronic world. People will read them if it's available. We were talking about Taner Akçam earlier. I'm particularly proud that on Turkish Armenian relations, we funded the research that ended up on the front page of the New York Times. We were not mentioned, but that's secondary. The fact that he could do that research, and we made a research grant available to him to be able to do that. So in that aspect, that was a highlight. In Armenia, I would say, I'm pleased that we put the bet on the right people. Let me put it that way. That we work with civil society organizations, with youth groups, with different individuals and researchers who were envisioning a different Armenia that we thought would come around in 20, 25 years' time. Bang, it happened last year. So I think that was something that is very pleasing. And the final thing I would say, I'm not mentioning specific projects, but the final thing I would say is we brought about a change in Lisbon that Armenians are present in the foundation, which they were not before, and they're present in the country. In terms of cultural events, one of the universities in Lisbon started teaching Armenian, Eastern Armenian in this case, and we gave a small grant, not a huge grant, because there were enough students that they wanted to do this. Within the foundation, making sure that people know Gulbenkian is Armenian, people understand what Armenian culture is, that component, I think, is something that, with Mr. Esayan, we managed to turn around in Lisbon. So those are some of the things that come to mind, when I reflect back the last 5 years.
Excellent. Very interesting things. I think I hadn't heard ISO code, but I think it's.
You would never hear about it because it's such an uncommunicable.
Yeah, but it's the basis of so much important stuff.
Yeah.
Now, okay, since you mentioned the job interview, what has been the most challenging part? Was it something you anticipated or expected that it would be hard? You mentioned balance and patience already, but...
The most challenging part?
Yeah?
Armenians.
You went into this job knowing, right? You were going to...
Most challenging part, I think, has been, I went into the job thinking that if we give grants to the right people, the right things will happen.
Okay.
And it's been challenging to find the right people, and it's been challenging to face a wall, not of resistance, but this thinking or approach is that, no, we don't want to change. Yes, we have a problem. Yes, our educational system is collapsing in the diaspora, but we don't want to change it. So they send money to the school. No, we're not just going to send money to the school unless we do some reforms. And so that dialogue didn't really, we didn't find the common as I thought it would go. I mean, that's been a huge challenge. I mentioned some of the success stories in terms of the electronic application, in terms of the digitization, electronic programs. But we also have huge challenges. We had an initiative of funding Armenian educational apps. And then we did an open call. We thought we should be fair. We did an open call, and we got, I don't know, 30 some odd applications. We supported 8. Every single one was a failure, except one. I'm on record, so one was not a failure. The other ones were a failure. And it was a learning experience because we realized that 3 things that need to come to have a simple app in your phone that's in Armenian, technology, language, and pedagogy, just don't come together in the Armenian world. In Armenia, they have great capacity in technology. Western Armenian is not there. Pedagogy is simply not there. Then you find people in the diaspora who know the pedagogy, but they have absolutely no clue about technology. So, you know, simple things like apps, where you think they're simple, then you realize when you're trying to do them how complicated they could be. So that's some of the challenges. And that's sort of a microcosm of the lack of qualified people in different fields that have to come together. You know, Markushi Bagas, the lack of human resources. A particular challenge for me, for my department, has been we don't communicate enough of what we do. You know, we're in Lisbon. We don't have, I shouldn't say we don't have time. We don't have time to communicate. We should make time, but we're busy doing things, and so we don't stand and say we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, and we ought to be doing it. And I'm going to try to correct that this year by actually doing a world tour, so to speak, like I did 5 years ago, to say this is what we accomplished, this is what we couldn't do, sort of a bigger version of this evening, and communicate to the Armenian world that, you know, we achieved some things and other things we're still working on. So that's, I think that could be some of the challenges.
You mentioned this world tour. I mean, you've already done one, so can you share with us any unique, memorable encounters or, you know, meeting interesting communities that you didn't expect to be?
You mean while traveling?
While traveling on your global
Right.
travels.
Okay, all right. My trip to Argentina was an eye-opener. Visiting the Armenian community in Argentina was an eye-opener. I have a friend in Argentina who said, we are the periphery of the periphery. And it's very true once you get there. But it is a very vibrant community. It's a unique community because it's 4th generation after the genocide, and it has not had input from Middle Eastern wars or crises in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So it's a community that relies on its own abilities. And that is actually quite fascinating to watch. So, they have 7 schools, 6 in Buenos Aires, 1 in Cordoba, 7 schools, and they work very hard to maintain these schools. The community mobilizes around the schools, and it's also geographically very concentrated. It's one street called Armenia Street, about the size of Savannah Gardens, and it's the church. The church is not divided, it's like London. But next to the church there is one school that's this way, and across it there's the other school that's this way. You know, you can guess, and there's the Dashna Club, and there's the AGBU Club, and the Hanchadian Club, and they're like all walking distance. And the Communist Clubs, and until recently, until about 5-6 years ago, you crossed the street, but you didn't enter that building, you entered this building. Okay. And that is melting away, because there's a pan-community organization called IARA, and that's melting away, and that's actually the community. What was very fascinating for me is that the community looking to itself in order to solve its problems, and that is actually quite an important realization. They're not looking to the Middle East, they're not looking to Armenia. You know, of course they're connected to Armenia, they go to Armenia, but as someone said, you guys in Europe can go to Armenia once or twice a year. For us to go to Armenia, it's maybe twice in our lifetime we can go to Armenia. So, you know, the distance, the cost, and things like that. So it was very, very, very interesting to actually see that community, a microcosm, and to meet fourth-generation Armenians that are very much connected to the Armenian community, to the thing. And of course, one cannot forget being in Istanbul.
Imagine that. But I need to know how many people is that community that they have 7 schools? And we're talking day schools, right? Not Saturday.
Day schools. How many? 50, 60? Haraj, do you have a guess?
60, 65,000.
60, 65,000.
65,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah, so it's anyway, it's, and actually to the southern tip of Argentina, which is called End of the World. It's
Tierra del Fuego.
And the only place to go after that is Antarctica. And I walked into a cafe, and it was a bit like unusual, and you know, I looked at the menu. It was the store, not grocery store, general store, that the Lebanese person had established in 1911, something like that, Lebanese from Tripoli, who met Kamil Shamoun, the president of Lebanon, in 1954, who had given him a photo signed by you know, the president of Lebanon, Kamil Shamoun, and I looked at the photo hanging on this wall, and it was signed Photo Manuk. So, even at the end of the world, there's an
That's right.
Photo.
Yeah, I've experienced that. Nimos don't know his faces. So, we talked about the diaspora, we talked about your travels. What about, you know, you mentioned the change in Armenia. So, where do you see the foundation, where do you see your department after the Velvet Revolution, vis-a-vis Armenia? Okay, turn off the camera.
Well, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
I think the important thing is the consolidation of the gains of the revolution of civil society. Civil society was in the fringes, and now they're in power of civil society. So they need accompaniment to some degree, I suppose. When I say we, I don't mean Gulbenkian, but we as Armenians, we need to make sure the revolution and the people in power stay clean as possible within you know, power corrupts, we all know. So, so we're thinking now, and we can certainly talk. What are the elements that we can support in Armenia that would strengthen sort of this gains? I think one element is emerging to encourage critical thinking in Armenia, to encourage the proper analysis of social issues, focusing on social issues. And for that, we're doing things like summer school programs, translation programs, to try to change the mentality. We also have a program that sends, it's a short-term scholarship that sends Armenians in Armenia, young Armenian academics in Armenia, to go abroad to take part in conferences and research trips and things like that. Just so that Armenia is connected to the world on one level. On the other hand, its thinking, especially in social sciences, is still very much Soviet in many respects, and trying to break that with. So, you know, civil society, I would say, and emphasis on critical thinking in the academic community. But what do you think? I mean, you tell me, because then I can take notes.
My concern is that a lot of the active people went into government, which is a good thing, but there's also a danger when we look at what happened to other post-revolutionary contexts, where you had places like Georgia or even South Africa over 2 decades ago, which ended up weakening civil society. And you lost that counterweight to keep government accountable. And I think you definitely need that, because you always need the balance in terms of governance. So I think there is that danger in Armenia, and there is also the danger that people who have stayed outside, sometimes they're self-censoring, they're not saying exactly what they think, partially because they want to give this new government an opportunity to consolidate its programs, to implement whatever it wants to implement. But I also think there is an importance for civic but critical dialogue to contribute. One concern I have is around, because I teach social and public policy, is the kind of neoliberal turn that social and public policies are taking in Armenia. Something that I keep hearing, which causes me great concern, is that when people start to say, well, why is there poverty in Armenia? They say, oh, it's because Armenians are lazy. And to my mind, that is a very neoliberal discourse, that it's not to do with structural inequalities, it's not to do with corruption, it's not to do with any kind of legacies of the past, but it's to do with the individual, and the individual is the problem. And I think you and I have a connection to LSC, and what is our motto? Rerum causes cognoscere, to understand the causes of things. I think you can't say, the cause of poverty in Armenia is because 900,000 people happen to be lazy. That just does not make sense. Yeah. So I think it's important to understand in order to come up with policies to address them. But this is not my show, this is yours. So I don't want to take over too much, except to say that I agree with you that we need to encourage critical thinking. We need to engage in evidence-based social analysis. And I think supporting researchers is a very important thing to do. Because if we don't understand the causes of the problems we're trying to address, we're not going to come up with proper solutions to them. And I don't think we're going to have the luxury of restarting this nation building yet again. So I think this is an opportunity not to be missed. Yeah.
Evidence-based social analysis, that's something we can actually work on.
Yeah.
Part of our, we'll get to that maybe later, but about 800,000 euros, about $1 million a year we give in university scholarships. Unfortunately, we say more no than yes, given how many university students there are. But about half a third of that is Armenian studies. The rest is for Armenian students studying anything, and Armenian studies is for anyone who studies Armenian subjects. And we have a very conscious policy that we want to emphasize contemporary issues. So, PhDs or master's students on contemporary issues, and less 10th century Christology, which is important, but 8 out of 10 applications were ancient subjects, and if 2 out of 10 are modern, we try to sort of reverse that. It's part of the balancing act,
Of course.
And still to this day, 5 years later, we still have a lot less people interested in contemporary issues when it comes to Armenian studies than with.
Sticking to this, are you going to publish a new 5-year plan, or?
We will publish a new 5-year plan. The board approved it,
okay.
But it's not in a format that could be published yet. It needs to be written
okay.
in a way that's more public friendly, let's put it that way. I've just been very busy with another major project at the foundation, so I haven't done that yet. The old 5-year plan had 4 pillars. I won't go through them because it's the resources on supporting pedagogic tools, on language programs, again, reforming Armenian schools as much as we can in terms of their approach to teaching Armenian, etc., etc. So pillar 1, which is, I think, it's the core element of our programming, is Western Armenian revitalization, preservation. So that's one. The second element is going to be the scholarships. As I said, we give about 800,000 euros a year in scholarships, and we will continue that. We are fine-tuning that a little bit so that we can put more money on Armenian studies.
Since we're at the AI Armenian Institute and we have finished,